Slouching towards democracy or becoming more authoritarian. Political reform was promised in Egypt. Is it being delivered? This is Inside Story. Hello and welcome to the third installment of our special series from Cairo. I'm Imran Garda. 3 years ago this month, President Hosni Mubarak was sworn in for a fifth consecutive term in office. In the run-up to his country's first ever multi-party election, Mubarak promised sweeping reforms to deliver a better life and more democracy for his people. So politically, where does the country stand now? Nashwa Nasruddin has more.
Alaa al-Aswani is one of Egypt's best-selling novelists. His most famous work, The Yaqubian Building, was later released as a big-budget movie production. It was a raw representation of the injustices within Egyptian society. Today, al-Aswani hosts a weekly literary group, open to the public, which often falls into political discussion.
She is a member of the ruling party. This is an evidence about our tolerance. This is a Kifaya movement, and this is a dear friend from the ruling party.
The forum brings together a cross-section of political views, but not necessarily a cross-section of society. Because, for the average Egyptian, talk of political reform is, well, just talk. It is 3 years since Egypt held supposedly historic elections. But for most Egyptians today, nothing has changed.
People have lost hope in political reform in 2008. The real result was that the ruling party has been able to resharpen its tools as a police state and to regain control over decision-making centers and political movements in Egypt.
For some opposition parties, it is a case of back to square one, having been denied the right to even contest elections.
We look for more than 12 years to have a license, but we haven't this license. They still now not believe seriously in reforms, political reform. So that's very difficult to believe them to change their mind, to accept it, to start in change in political reform.
Despite being officially outlawed, the Wasat or centrist party continues to operate, reaching out to fellow politicians and influential figures. Here at one of Cairo's five-star hotels, they are hosting a Ramadan dinner. Yet despite this impressive gathering, the political influence of the centrist party is negligible, with the group remaining victims of Egypt's democratic stagnation.
Political reform takes a long time. It's an extremely complex process, especially in the period of change which Egypt is going through right now.
And this so-called complex process has further contributed to a perceived disconnect between the politicians and the people.
Liberal politicians shouldn't use terms which people don't understand. They must simplify them and present them in a calm manner to an audience which has become aware enough to be able to accept important ideas.
But one thing many Egyptians do understand is that life is getting harder. And in such a difficult economic climate, the desire for daily bread is much greater than the desire for democracy. And this year, the frustrations of a traditionally compliant workforce have boiled over.
The reform efforts which the state may have started have given rise to a new generation in Egypt which believes in political activity and in the power of pressure outside the circle of political parties. When you look at all the strikes and demonstrations by labor movements, you easily discover that there is a power within Egypt which believes in action to pressure the state for its rights.
Egypt woke up. Egypt woke up. Egypt is no more the same country it used to be 10 years ago. Now everybody in Egypt is demanding his own human rights. This situation is going to change. This situation cannot last forever.
And yet, despite the occasional flashpoints, it seems that little has changed in real terms since 2005. And ultimately, it's not the politicians nor the intellectuals who bear the brunt. Nashwa Nasruddin for Inside Story in Cairo.
And joining us now to delve deeper into this issue are our guests, Rabab Al-Mahdi, Assistant Professor of Political Science at the American University in Cairo. Next to her, Abdulaziz Ashadi, Associate Professor of Political Science at Cairo University. And next to him, Manar Ash-Shourbaghi, Senior Scholar at the Arab Center for Development and Future Studies. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you very much for joining us. Welcome to the program. Abdulaziz Ashadi, let's look at the last line of that report. It said it's not the politicians nor the intellectuals who bear the brunt. I'm assuming it's the people, right?
Well, politicians and intellectuals are people, and they're part of this society. We cannot separate them. They were raised up in that society, and they were elected by that society.
So let's say the majority of the people then.
Well, I do think that such kind of analysis is not accurate in Egypt. There is no such big gap between the politician and the people in Egypt. I do think that this gap is imaginative, is imagined, is not precise, and I do think politicians feel the problems of the Egyptian society as well as the intellectual. But the problem is how to react to that problems, how to react to the crisis of the Egyptian society. I do think there is a sort of surgical operation going on in the Egyptian society, and in the surgical operation, you do have some kind of side effects.
Let's go to Rabab Al-Mahdi. Your reaction to that, firstly, and secondly, let's look at the last 3 years. Out of 10, in terms of political reform, give me a mark out of 10 you would give the government.
I think if the scale has negative numbers, less than 0, that would be how I rate it. I mean, people keep talking about that this is a long and complex process. This regime has been in power for more than 25 years. I mean, what more time? The pyramids were built in 20 years, you know. So time is not, and let's look at the examples of other countries of the South. We've seen democratization processes elsewhere. This is not a new, we're not reinventing the wheel. It has never taken that long of a time. I mean, Dr. Abdulaziz talks about the idea that there is no gap between the politicians, and I think I don't know if you mean politicians, i.e. officials, or politicians both from the opposition and the ruling elite. And I think there is a gap between either of them and the people.
Let's go to Manar Ash-Shourbaghi. There was even talk of an Arab Spring. That was the term people were using 3 years ago in 2005. With all the optimism that surrounded that election in 2005, do you think it's fallen flat 3 years down the line and all of it has disappeared?
I would say yes, especially I think that the dreams of the Egyptian people have been dashed because you see, there has been, as Rabab said, there has been gradual, we have been promised of this gradual type of reform for so long. It has been going on since even the 2005 elections. And the idea is that the Egyptians are not really up to the democratization. And then we were willing to go with this so long as it's gradual, serious reform. But then it turns out there's no serious steps that have been taken, whether before that time or even after that time. Look at the constitutional reforms that have been done. They were actually taking us backward and not forward.
No, it has. I do think that Manar is right in to some extent in saying that the people are suffering, but she's not right when she is saying that the government does nothing about it, or there is a gap between what the people feel and what the government is doing. In my point of view, the government is trying to develop a certain response to the crisis from a different approach.
So what are you saying? Are you saying people shouldn't have democracy until their stomachs are full?
The priorities of the Egyptian society, in my point of view, is the economic problem. We have to deal with the economic problem. We have to solve the problem of unemployment. We have to solve the problem of water. We have to solve the problem of housing. We have to be just, to do justice in distributing the resources of the society. And then comes the political reforms. According to my point of view, I do think there are some kind of hope in this process. Look at the relationship between the judiciary and the executive. In my point of view, the judiciary now is in a better position than before. The judiciary is more independent than before. Look at the relationship.
But how come at this stage, you're talking about the judiciary being
Yes.
more independent than it's ever been.
Yes.
Yet a group like Transparency International can still rate Egypt as one of the most corrupt countries in the world.
Well, corruption, yes, there is corruption in Egypt, but this doesn't mean that we don't have a judiciary. Corruption is a human phenomena, it is a socio-economic phenomena, but you do have a judiciary that can track this corruption down. So this is the first issue concerning political reforms. Look at also the way through which the president is elected. Now we do have an elected president, not a president that is chosen by a referendum. A president that is elected through a fair election between political parties.
Okay.
In the past, we
Can I get a
didn't have
response
that.
from Rabab
Can
to
I
that?
complete?
Can I get a quick response from Rabab
Okay.
to that first? You made your point. Rabab, you had a sarcastic smile when
I
you
mean,
said that.
we've been told over and over again throughout the past 25 years that we're going to get the economic reform first and then we're going to move to democratization. And actually, 25 years later, we have got neither. The problem in this logic is that they are not two separate things. When you don't have, democracy is about accountability. It's about participation in decision making. It's about division of resources. It's not only the ballot box. The ballot box is a means to something bigger. When you delink those two things, what you get is this unholy alliance between power and capital that you see in Egypt. That's why you see those tycoons who are monopolizing the market, monopolizing power and playing the biggest roles in shaping policies with no idea, the conception of conflict of interest almost non-present. The NDP people who control the market, who have monopolies, are the biggest top-shot decision-making powers. So when you de-link those two,
Right.
you get neither.
Can I move on to Manara Shourbaghi? I want to talk a little bit about the opposition before we take a break. Wouldn't the whole process of democratization be a lot simpler if the opposition was unified? It's fragmented. Who speaks for the opposition in Egypt?
I agree with you. And now you have a situation in which the opposition, you have two types of opposition. You have the official parties that have the license, the so-called license, officially to work, and these official parties have been, logged in their headquarters, unable to communicate with the public, and therefore drastically weakened. Now you have other forces that are either like the Muslim Brothers, who never got, which is a banned or organization, or other political parties that would like to be a political party and never given a license. So you have not just fragmentation, but a weird situation in which the opposition is a permanent opposition and the ruling party is a permanent ruling party, and that's actually something that that makes things harder for any political reform, because once there is circulation of power, there is always new blood coming in, new people with new ideas, not the same people who are running things. Like, I mean, why
Right.
would the ruling party be interested in leaving power?
All right.
So long as
when we come back from the break, we'll get Abdelaziz Ashadi's response to whether it is a permanent ruling party. It is time for a quick break. We're back in a minute. Do stay with us.